Welcome everyone to our awesome webinar. We're going to go ahead and get started because we have 4 amazing speakers and a quick timeline. So we're going to go ahead and kick this off and jump right into innovative approaches to increasing FAFSA completion from data to action. I'm Kimberly Krupa. I'm pleased to be our MC and host today. I help lead network engagement and development for FCAN. Thrilled to be here talking about my favorite 5-letter word, FAFSA, and all things innovative ways to connect students to financial aid. Before we jump in, just a couple quick housekeeping items. We are not going to save questions for the end. We're going to ask you to go ahead and ask your questions live. Just because time is of the essence, we want to make sure we can address what's on your mind as it comes to your mind, and we're going to do our best to field those questions as we go. So if something occurs to you, if you have a burning question for one of our speakers, go ahead and ask it. And my colleague here, Dane Shelton, is going to help me navigate the Q&A. We also will make this recording and all materials shared available to you, including a blog post with key highlights and all your questions answered. Within the next 7 days. We try to make a commitment to get that back out to our audience in a week. So we love hearing your questions. Please ask them as they occur to you. So for those just getting to know us, here's our mission and vision, and we're passionate about ensuring every Floridian can achieve an education beyond high school and build a rewarding career. We do that by accomplishing this vision of a Florida working together where education is the pathway to economic mobility for all. And we do this in many ways, as you see here on the screen, from research and advocacy to storytelling and supporting amazing local networks and initiatives across our state. Highlighted here in yellow are our statewide initiatives that we coordinate, including one that is the topic of today, our Florida FAFSA Challenge. We believe in 7 conditions for success, and this is what guides our work, as you can see here on this screen. Won't read them out loud to you, but just calling your attention to the 2 highlighted in yellow on affordability and community collaboration, which we think is in our DNA. We're especially excited to announce that we're currently accepting, and this is hot off the presses, this is going out in our February newsletter that will be in many of your inboxes shortly, but we're currently accepting nominations for our Innovator Awards. And this is our annual awards that we're accepting change makers, high schools, champions across the state. Nominations are open through March 14th, and those winners will be honored at our upcoming summit in Orlando at the Hyatt Regency Grand Cypress Resort, May 5th through 7th. And so here are the categories for innovators that you'd like to nominate in your own community. And we wanted to plug this today at the top, and also we'll include the link in the chat to the nomination box. It's super easy to nominate someone, but we're interested in celebrating people and also organizations that are embracing creative strategies, the topic of today, to get students enrolled to and through college. The second category, workforce education, is all things innovation to connect Floridians with workforce training, addressing non-academic barriers to credential completion. And then the last one is our FAFSA Trailblazer Award. We love this one because it's recognizing high schools that are doing systems work at their school level to drive FAFSA completion. So please consider who in your community is a champion and a change maker and who you could nominate to be part of our 2025 award process. It's always pretty competitive, but we trust you to come forward with some great candidates. So without further ado, today we have an incredible panel of experts ready to share their insights. Right after me, I'm going to invite my colleague, Dane Shelton, who is FCAN's research analyst, to kick us off with some fresh insights and data about Florida, where we are with our FAFSA challenge. What are some new ways to think about closing gaps in access and in completion, and just kind of showing us where we are and where we need to focus our efforts in Florida. Right after Dane, we're going to invite our national colleague, Alessandra Cipriani Dietrich from the National College Attainment Network. Welcome. She brings such an incredible and valuable national perspective on what's working across different states and communities that are both members of NCAN and doing innovative work leading in the field. And we're excited to hear that national picture. We're going to come back to Florida and welcome our financial aid expert, Daniel Barkowitz, who's currently the Assistant Vice President at the University of Miami. Hardly needs an introduction, but will share practical insights that from his extensive financial aid experience, and also some recent FAFSA challenges and successes, maybe I could frame it that way, that are making a real difference for students, and maybe a little bit of a sneak peek on what to expect at the front of the field as the FAFSA process continues to unfold and evolve. And we're going to close it out with our last panelist, Dr. David Ford, who is the Bureau Chief at the Iowa Department of Education, and I'll introduce a little bit more thoroughly during our fireside chat. He will round out our discussion with some innovative approaches to embedding FAFSA into existing educational frameworks, which is something we're really excited to learn about here. So let's get started. I'm excited to learn from each of our panelists, and I know you are too. And we're going to get started with Dane.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kim. I'm Dane Shelton, the research analyst at FCAN. I'm actually filling in for our research director today, Dave Sobush, who you're all familiar with. I'm a little less charming than Dave, so I don't have any clever one-liners up my sleeve, but I am responsible, along with my colleague, Kina Winchin, for updating our FAFSA tracking efforts weekly. And we truly appreciate the questions and concerns that you all have submitted from your engagement with the dashboard. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this page, FCAN's FAFSA dashboard for the 24-25 school year, or the 25-26 FAFSA cycle, tracking submissions, completions, and completion rates for over 800 schools in Florida. If you don't recognize this page, you can access it using the web link circled in the search bar, or by navigating to floridacollegeaccess.org and selecting it from the research and policy menu. The landing page is where you'll be able to search for your school or district based on a variety of filters, as well as access links to the data itself and resources detailing FAFSA completion strategies. Next slide, please. So keeping on the landing page, we've got a bar chart displaying current completion rates in blue, and then target completion rates as the red reference line for each school or district. This year's FAFSA challenge is to achieve a 5 percentage point increase from the 2023 cohort's completion rates as of March 31st, 2023. And that's at the state, district, and school level. At around 24% completion, Florida is ranked near the bottom in NCAN's FAFSA tracker, but we have shown significant year-over-year improvement, with NCAN having the state at 11th in growth of submissions compared to the previous year's cycle week. These estimates are going to be calculated from two primary resources: the Federal Student Aid Office's weekly FAFSA completion release, and that's coming directly from the federal government and includes submission and completion counts for the current cycle and previous cycle for that published week. The second data source, Florida Department of Education's Survey 2 enrollment figures, allows us to use the reported number of seniors to produce an estimated completion rate. This data was collected at a singular point in time, and it will not adjust for student movement beyond this point in time. In the top right corner of this page, we see the Florida snapshot monitoring the state's progress towards the mentioned 5 percentage point increase from 2023. And we also show the remaining FAFSAs to achieve that goal. When we hover over one of the blue completion bars, a tooltip displays further details on the school or district's performance that we can then expand once clicking on the desired bar. Next slide, please. So here we are on the school detail page, or the angry robot graph, to use the technical term popularized by our research team. We find more detailed information surrounding a school or district's completion efforts. Here's where you'll find our year-over-year comparison in addition to weekly completion counts. Currently, the data detailing the previous cycle is coming in at less than 5 for all schools, preventing us from displaying an accurate rate, hence the 0% completion rate for the previous year. We expect these values to begin populating over the coming month, but there is an advisory tooltip present on this page when you hover over that 0%. For more information on our methodology and process, I encourage everyone to check out the updated addendum linked at the bottom of this page and the landing page as well. Next slide, please. So we're all aware that these numbers aren't really valuable without context, right? Why do we want to increase FAFSA completion, let alone track it? FAFSA completion, as you're all aware, is highly correlated with college enrollment and readiness, as it demonstrates a desire to continue post-secondary education and helps to answer the all-important question of cost. Helios has produced some great research investigating 4 different scenarios of improving college access and completion and what community members can gain individually, socially, and fiscally. Individually, on this slide, this familiar graph shows there's a clear positive correlation between college completion and lifetime earnings. Bachelor's degree holders will earn nearly double that of high school graduates over their lifetime. These individual earnings will snowball into the billions of dollars in societal and fiscal gains demonstrated on the next slide. So briefly describing these impacts before reviewing the 4 scenarios, societal gains will appear in the form of increased earnings, improved health, and reduced crime, supporting an increase in quality of life for all residents. The beneficial tax consequences produced by increased enrollment and completion lead to higher revenues and lower public expenditures on health and crime. So the 4 scenarios that Helios took a look at were 10% increases in enrollment and readiness, a 20% increase in completion, and the elimination of racial attainment gaps. All the gains presented here are in billions of dollars, and if I could leave you with some numbers, I'll point to the $3.43 billion of fiscal gains and the $8.38 billion social gain produced by a 10% increase in enrollment rate, just getting students through the door. Helios.org contains the full report and methodology, as well as county level data for those in Florida. And it's very clear that there are billions to gain. And so a massive credit to everyone on this call for pursuing the work in such a diligent manner. I'll go ahead and I'm going to pass to Alessandra to discuss national completion trends and statewide strategies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dane. Are you all seeing estimated percent of seniors submitting, or are you seeing the title slide?
Title slide.
You're seeing the title slide?
Yes.
Okay. And now you see the full screen, right?
Yes.
Amazing. You'd think at this point I'd be great at sharing screens on Zoom. But all right, thank you everyone. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Alessandra Cipriani-Dietrich. I'm a program associate at the National College Attainment Network, and I'm very excited to share with you some national FAFSA completion trends and some FAFSA completion strategies that we are seeing from some other states that I'm excited to share with you all today. So let's get into some FAFSA data. Now, we all know that last year was less than ideal. So I want to really pinpoint this point of why FAFSA completion matters so much before we start getting into what the data from last year and this year is looking like. So this chart right here, you'll see a lot of different circles, and each of these circles represents one of the 50 states that we're able to track FAFSA completions. And you can see here that states that have a lower FAFSA completion percentage oftentimes have a lower immediate college enrollment rate after high school for high school seniors. And we do see a really positive association between states' FAFSA completion rate and the rate at which they go to college, really pinpointing the point as to why FAFSA completion is so important. We also see, when we look year over year, we see a trend historically that when FAFSA completion goes down, first fall enrollment rates for college also go down. And you can see this by this year over year FAFSA percentage change. For example, in 2023, we saw a positive percentage change. We saw a positive college enrollment rate for college freshmen. When you look at 2024, we saw one of the biggest year-over-year FAFSA percentage change decreases, even bigger than during the COVID pandemic. But we actually saw a slight increase in first-time college enrollment rate for the fall. And so this is the first time that we're seeing this, and this data is actually very surprising for us at NCAN. We're still trying to come up with different hypotheses as to why this is, but we're definitely going to need more data and more years to come for trends that we can follow and look at. Taking a look at how the class of 2024 did, the estimated percent of seniors who completed a FAFSA for the class of 2024 was 54.4% through mid-December, definitely a decrease from the class of 2023, and that year-over-year percentage change was also stark. And I wanna pinpoint and emphasize that usually we don't see this strong of a curve from April in the FAFSA cycle to December of the FAFSA cycle. And I think that, just how we went from a negative almost 40% year-over-year percent change in April to negative just 9% really shows all of your great efforts that you put into in the summer to support students with FAFSA completion, when usually students are not getting that support once the school doors close at the end of May or beginning of June. So props to you all for mitigating such a really, really tough year. Our next slide is going to be a little heat map of FAFSA percentage, year-over-year percentage change for FAFSA completions by state. And I want to preface this map by showing you what a normal heat map of the United States looks like. Usually we see some reds, blues, yellows, reds usually indicating decreases, blues and greens indicating increases in something. But here is what the heat map of the United States looked like through the end of December for the year-over-year percent change in FAFSA completions. It's a lot of reds, a lot of oranges, and a lot of yellows. So we can see that North Dakota had the smallest decrease when it comes to year-over-year percent change, but otherwise every state in the country was going through a similar experience because of the national troubles we were having with the form. Looking at how the class of 2025 is doing, little hint, they're doing much better, which is a great sign. I really want to focus on this chart on the right-hand side of the screen. So this chart compares the year-over-year percent change in FAFSA submissions, not completions. So reminding us that submissions is when a student has pressed submit on their FAFSA, but if they need to complete corrections, their FAFSA is not complete until those corrections and things are completed. So this is submissions, not completions. But compared to the high school class of 2025, from last year, we're seeing a 2.4% increase year-over-year percent change based on week 9 of the cycle, which is very promising to see. And if you take a look at NCAN's FAFSA tracker online, you will notice that we are measuring FAFSA completion through the week of the cycle, not by the date. And this is because last year, the week of the cycle, we didn't start getting data until April of 2024. And so measuring our data as, okay, when did week 1 of each cycle, since we had different start dates when the form was available, that is how we are measuring things. But we will have data so you can compare by date fairly soon in the next month or so. I want to get into sharing with you some statewide FAFSA completion strategies that we've seen from 3 states across the country. And to start off, NCAN considers strong FAFSA completion efforts kind of like a 3-legged stool. So we have practice, people, and policy. And if you have these 3 things well aligned in your state or in your community, we feel like you will have these things to have a successful FAFSA completion strategy. We think in Florida, you have a lot of these things. Maybe the policy leg is maybe the weakest leg. You will know better in your communities and the communities that you serve. But within all of this, we have various elements of effective FAFSA practice. So here are the buckets that we oftentimes see states pursuing. So we'll see them having resources. These can be resources for educators and practitioners, students and families. We see communications efforts. So completing the FAFSA, we know that this is not intuitive for a lot of students, and we need to tell people how to do it. They have motivators, something like FAFSA challenges, districts competing with each other to have the highest FAFSA completions, and rewarding those schools when they do something really great. Partnerships so that you can cover more ground across your state while gathering insights and recommendations from different perspectives. And lastly, data, so identifying where and how we can improve by knowing what's working and what maybe isn't. Now, as I go into these 3 states, I'd like you to keep these 2 words in mind: adopt and adapt. Um, I think it's easy to say that the states I'm about to show you, they have a lot of resources, a lot of funding, a lot of support in their states to be able to do the really great things that they're doing. And I think that's a very valid point. However, there are going to be things that might be easily adaptable from each of these states and certain programs and policies that you might be able to implement in your communities that you serve. So let's start with Tennessee. Tennessee's FAFSA Frenzy. If you haven't already, I encourage you to just Google FAFSA Frenzy Tennessee and take a look at their website. It is one of the most beautiful websites I've ever seen when it comes to FAFSA resources. But Tennessee has their Promise program, which provides students with free tuition to community or technical college and requires FAFSA completion in order to be eligible for the scholarship, which is a really great way to encourage FAFSA completion, of course. But with regard to resources, their Tennessee FAFSA Frenzy Toolkit is a great resource for not only students, but for families and counselors as well. When it comes to data, Tennessee has a really, really neat weekly high school by high school update on FAFSA completion rates that they send out to individual high schools about where there are with regard to FAFSA completion, which students have completed a FAFSA, which have started an application for the Tennessee Promise Scholarship, so that counselors are able to directly support the students that maybe they're missing when it comes to getting them through that application process. When it comes to motivators, Tennessee also has a FAFSA Challenge and a FAFSA Champions program. So FAFSA Champions, they get a banner to hang in the school, which is kind of like being like a state football champion, for example. So it's something that folks can look to for motivation, a little friendly competition, if you will. They also have an excellent partnership. So loads of different CBOs and the Department of Education at the state level to encourage strong partnerships across the state. So here's a quick look at what these weekly emails look like from Tennessee. So you can see the amount of applicants that have completed a FAFSA within a certain high school, who has submitted, and then if you can go into those links on the newsletter and it'll show different data visualizations and things. And if you are interested in this, NCAN is happy to show you how to do this so that you can push these out to your schools in the districts that you serve. When it comes to those weekly statewide, the collaboration between partners in Tennessee, they schedule weekly meetings with all of those partners. So even if there's not something pressing coming up, they still have that space to ensure that FAFSA completion remains a crucial step to getting their students into whatever post-secondary educational opportunity is right for them after high school. Next, I'll share a little bit about the Washington Student Achievement Council. Washington has a lot of political support from the state, and you can see this because all of these different grant opportunities on this slide, they have a lot of different money tied to them. And the really great part about this is that each different grant opportunity supports students from various backgrounds for a variety of post-secondary options. So these are not just grant programs for students to use in a four-year college degree program, but they are for students who want to pursue career and technical education programs, those in STEM fields or in high demand apprenticeships and certificates programs, but they're also for students from various backgrounds. So students who have social and cultural ties to an American Indian tribe or community in the state of Washington, those from low-income families or middle-income families. So really trying to target and support a wide variety of students in the state. Washington also has loads of different programming that they do, and I want to highlight a couple that are particularly important now. So supporting mixed status families, we know that there has been a lot of attacks from the federal government on undocumented folks in this country. And last year with the FAFSA form, supporting students from mixed status families was a really challenging time to navigate. So because of all of these challenges that counselors are facing, they've created webinars as to how to support mixed status families. What are the things that you should be saying, you should not be saying? How can you best serve them? And with the new FAFSA, change on the FAFSA form about having students decide between male and female, there's no longer a non-binary or prefer not to respond option for them. How do you support LGBTQ plus youth when they are filling out the FAFSA? So, when you're filling out a FAFSA, how do you, you might need to ask them for their dead name for trans students. And that's can be a tough thing to navigate for counselors who maybe have never had to encounter that situation before. So a lot of great support for some of the most vulnerable students that they serve. And lastly, with Washington, they have a wonderful resource called the OtterBot. It is an AI texting platform that students and families can opt into, and they will get a handful of texts per month from the state with regard to their post-secondary endeavors. And as I go into our last state, Arizona, talking about chatbots, Arizona has another AI chatbot called Ask Benji. And Ask Benji is really neat because students can ask specific questions to Ask Benji, and Benji will respond. So this is a great way to hopefully lessen the load on counselors who might be getting 20 questions a day, like, hey, when's the application deadline for the University of Arizona? They can just ask Benji and Benji will respond. So saving some counselors some time. But Arizona also has really great political support. They had a $500,000 investment in FAFSA initiatives from Governor Hobbs, a really strong ecosystem of connections with Arizona, the Arizona College Access Network, Arizona Board of Regents, and of course, some friendly FAFSA competitions. So these are just a few states who we think are doing really promising work with regard to FAFSA completion. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out anytime. My email is here on the board. We are always happy to support when it comes to data, connecting you to anyone. So happy to support in any way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alessandra and Dane, for those valuable state and national perspectives. I think we answered one of the questions in the chat, which is when are we going to get to effective practices? And we're going to continue with that with our next two speakers, but really appreciate that thorough landscape scan. We're going to shift our format a bit for more of an in-depth conversation with two experts who are implementing or know about innovative FAFSA completion strategies that are kind of outside the box. First up is a dear friend, Mr. Daniel Barkowitz, again, Assistant Vice President at the University of Miami, for a little bit of a fireside chat, as much as we can do that through Zoom, about his experiences leading FAFSA initiatives in Florida. And Dan brings not only his expertise as a NASFA financial aid administrator, but also recent experiences, to Alessandra's point about beta testing new FAFSA processes right here in our own state. We had two beta testers in the fall, and Dan represents one of our largest and most successful. So I'd love to start our conversation, if we could, by getting your perspective as someone who's been deeply involved in financial aid in Florida. So what are some of the most significant barriers you're seeing to FAFSA completion, particularly on students Alessandra really brought home those underserved populations.
Yeah, I'll echo with a couple of things that Alessandro said. I think knowledge of how to do the forum remains a challenge. And especially as the forum itself changes and evolves as we go through the iterations that have come with FAFSA simplification, making sure that you as a community-based organization have the most up-to-date information and knowledge to be able to help becomes problematic. So one of the questions is, what resources do you have to get the most recent information? And that certainly is FCAN. I mean, FCAN's done a tremendous job of sharing information. But I also I'll talk a little later, I think, about being in the beta process and how being a beta tester really allowed us not just to learn as a community-based organization, but actually to have a voice in shaping the eventual outcome of a much improved process this year. So knowledge is a big lack. Concern and worry. I think right now, given the administration change, and obviously any new administration, there's going to be concern and changes that come about. In this particular moment, where it really feels like a really fraught political environment, where there's a lot of parental concern, student concern from our underserved population. Specifically, Alessandra talked about LGBTQ students, about students from mixed status families, about what happens to their data. Is their data protected? What will be the outcome of that? So I think that can be a barrier. I can assure you, as much as anyone can assure anyone of anything these days, so that's my caveat, that at this point, the information is protected that's in the FAFSA under FERPA rules, but we don't know what the future will hold. So I know some mixed status families are concerned about getting the application in. I'll also share, again, it sounds like Alessandra, we echo each other well. I think timing is a really important aspect of this piece. So I'll claim a little ownership in Florida in helping solve some of those summer problems. We were very involved through Bridge to Life in Broward County in the ECMC summer pilot project in the summer of 2024, really focused on trying to get students to complete. Late in the cycle, we saw Florida dramatically move in terms of FAFSA completion in a time frame where typically we would not have been working with students and families. But again, last year sort of required that. And the last piece I'll say is I think there still is an atmosphere or an attitude of college just isn't for me, and I can't afford it even if I went. So trying to sort of tell the story, you talked about, Kimberly, of storytelling within FCAN, telling the story of how do you connect your passion, the thing you love, with your career, the thing you want to earn money doing, and navigate that through the college environment becomes a really important narrative to help students understand. They see what they want to do. They see what they love to do. They don't see necessarily all the time that the path to get there is the college pathway and the affordability pathway. And how do we help connect that? So FAFSA is not a standalone process, but it's part of a larger narrative.
I really love that so much. I'm going to ask you to stick with that point as you talk to us about that beta testing experience and what was it like kind of communicating that end goal or result to those students, thousands of students from Broward, Bridge to Life. Were able to complete that FAFSA earlier than almost everybody else because of your guidance and support and encouragement. But what were some of the key lessons that you learned in terms of good strategies that we might be able to take away here?
So I will say one strategy that we learned is don't back away, lean in. So I will say part of the background here is we were one of the first folks to discover at University of Miami, a number of the 24-25 FAFSA issues and problems. And so a response would have been to back away and to say, we'll wait until it gets fixed and then we'll figure it out. Instead, we leaned in very heavily. So when there was an open application for beta participants in partnership with Broward Bridge to Life and Colleen Lockwood, she and I together created this partnership. And I think that's also really important is if you're a community-based foundation or school district, you don't want to do this alone. Again, I'm going to echo what Alessandra said before. You want to find your institutional partner. Find a partner at your local institution. For us, this really was part of our public mission and concern, was getting in front of students, working in partnership with the community foundation, us, the school district, our partner college is also in Broward, so it wasn't just University of Miami, it was FAU, it was Broward College. So we could represent the whole life cycle of the college enrollment perspective so that students could see themselves reflected throughout. And, I will say the other thing that motivated people was, and there's a great video that that maybe we can send out after this event that shows our tie-in, our actual first evening event. We did at Broward, we did the first FAFSA event on the first day that beta testing was available nationwide. Department of Education flew in about 10 staff to help supervise. We had 1,000 people in the room. It was a massive event. And I don't want to underplay a key motivator, and it's going to sound silly, but Kimberly, food motivates people. And frankly, the other thing we did is, with help from some corporate partners and others and foundation partners, we gave students a $25 Amazon gift card to do their FAFSA. So again, giving them a financial reward. You would imagine the FAFSA itself is a financial reward, but an instant financial reward can be motivating. So, having that partnership, having that motivation, drawing the line for them, I think helps. I will also say, although we're focused on in-person today, I want to mention virtual works. It can work. Don't forget virtual, but you need to not just do it once, do it frequently, and post the recording. So if you go to Broward Bridge to Life, the YouTube channel, you can find all the webinars I've done over the last 8 months publicly available, so people can always go back and check and take a look at step by step through the FAFSA how to complete it.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I was going to plug that as well in terms of an effective and scalable strategy, to your point of knowledge, having really well-trained navigators who are helping students and they can address issues and are sort of savvy in all the issues that might come up. We have a question here about the SAI. Is also a key tool to like solve that problem in the present instead of maybe kicking the can down the road or getting back to them. But can you talk more about those strategies that you've seen effective? So we've got rewards, food, always a magnet, any type of flexibility with hybrid approaches, evening, weekend, 2-gen approaches. Can you talk more about what you've seen really shine?
Yeah, and I don't want to steal David's thunder, but I also think that having a tie-in to the curriculum is really helpful. So being able to sort of draw from the classroom to the space, being able to see a pathway forward for populations that may not necessarily see that pathway every day, and being specific about it. So again, the language I use is passion to career. So how do you move what you love into what you get paid to do? And where does college fit into that that piece, that space? And again, I think really thinking broadly about who are your partners in this work. So, I sit at University of Miami. We draw nationally. We draw applicants from all over the country. But I'm really focused on my local partners because I know I can make a difference locally, right? If you're in a local school district or community-based foundation, community organization, reaching out to your local financial aid officers to invite them in to start forming and forging that partnership. It's the same work we do, just from different sides of the desk. So how do we do that work together? I think can be really, really helpful. So that's a taste of it. I think, also helping students, again, see that college can be for them. The data that Dane shared, sort of showing the lifetime earnings piece, is helpful, but also helpful is having some video testimonials from people who've done this before from your community that can actually, share their personal stories.
I love it. So FAFSA Plus, it doesn't just end with the form.
Correct.
So looking ahead, putting your future hat on, what changes or support structures do you believe Florida needs to put in place to increase FAFSA completion rate statewide, to take us from the bottom of the barrel to the top of the heap?
So I will say, money is key here, right? That we need more support financially to make this happen. And so as citizens in the state of Florida, we have an advocacy voice. Part of it is using our advocacy voice to advocate for governmental priorities. Right now, as a state, we prioritize, and I understand, Bright Futures as sort of our investment. I support Bright Futures. It's a great program. It's made a difference in lots of lives. It doesn't necessarily serve the most underserved populations as well as it could. I see logged into the webinar today one of my good friends from the Office of Student Financial Assistance at the state of Florida. They do great work. So partnering with them to help pass the public message, I think, is really key. Building knowledge, and again, I know FCAN's done a great job, and I'm happy to partner, and I know other associations have in Florida as well. Building your personal knowledge about FAFSA, so when a student comes to you, you feel able to answer, I think is really important. And I would argue for more partnerships between schools and colleges and CBOs. I think that is really critical to getting to the next step. I will say there are some exciting things coming in 26, 27. Breaking news that I'm going to sort of share with you here that I think will make this better. So Alessandro, you can look surprised. If you already know this, you can then pretend to look surprised. But we did hear some news last week from Aaron Lemon-Strauss. Aaron Lemon-Strauss is the new executive director of the FAFSA for the federal government. A couple pieces that I just want to highlight for you. Number one, and this will make things easier. I know one of the single largest problems students have had is connecting their parents to the FAFSA. That invitation process has been very clunky. You have to send an email. You have to have the right Social Security match. You have to make sure you know your parents' date of birth, et cetera, et cetera. In the new FAFSA for 26, 27, they're trying out a 6-digit link where the student can say, I want to invite my parent. Here's the web address with 6 digits at the end. I can just share those 6 digits with my parent so they don't have to go through this whole clunky process. So that is one piece that they're working on, which I think will streamline very much. The other piece is there is still a desire to do beta testing. So while there now is a law that requires FAFSA to go live October 1, up to this point, it's been a practice, but not a law. The law is now on the books. The department's talking about a potential start of August 1 for beta testing. And I'm sure there'll be a call for beta volunteers for 26, 27. If you're at a CBO or at a school district or at a university, I would look for that call to think about the possibility of being part of beta testing. I think beta testing gives you a great insight into what's coming. Hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. I know we could be talking all day, but you are coming to the FCAN Summit.
I am planning on being there, yes.
And I know there will be lots of folks on this call also there, and there will be an opportunity to pick the Barkowitz brain at our Talent Strong Florida Summit, May 5th through 7th coming up. Thank you so much for those incredible insights. What's working, what still needs to work in Florida's FAFSA completion landscape. We're excited to turn to Dr. David Ford, our final speaker, who I think brings a fascinating perspective on embedding FAFSA completion into existing education systems. Dr. David Ford just briefly introduced you earlier, but he is the bureau chief at the Iowa Department of Education, where he oversees state financial aid programs, post-secondary registration and authorization, and community engagement programs. He serves as executive director of the Iowa College Student Aid Board of Commissioners and president and CEO of the Post-Secondary Attainment Institute. And I think what's particularly relevant to our conversation today is Dr. Ford's experience leading statewide efforts to connect that future-ready Iowa post-secondary attainment goal to the school districts, focusing on increasing both high school graduation rates and FAFSA completion. In 2019, he was named Advocate of the Year for the Iowa School Counselor Association, and in 2016 was recognized as a White House Champion of Change for Education Innovation for his work in advancing college access in Iowa. So thank you so much for joining us, David. I'd love to start our conversation by understanding Iowa's journey in your own words with FAFSA completion. When many states were pursuing universal FAFSA policies, Iowa chose a different path. So can you tell us about what led to that decision?
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to join, especially when I get a chance to be part of this conversation, just because it's access, affordability, and attainment has been my lifeblood for a very long time. So As a policy wonk and state employee, sometimes I don't get a chance to do this very often. So appreciate the invitation here. Yeah, so I've been in Iowa for about 17 or 18 years, and I brought with that some experience in the K-12 and higher ed sectors in both the East and West Coast. And one of the things that I noticed when I landed here was kind of a great degree of apathy around the post-secondary planning process. Having come from hyper-competitive kind of college admissions worlds in schools on the coast, where it was fully expected that the middle school, even in the, for sure, the high school, they were prime to make sure that students successfully transitioned out of K-12 into the next step. And the idea when I moved here was more, that's really the individual's choice, and it wasn't necessarily for the system to address. So I found myself a little bit of an existential crisis. And as I was trying to navigate that space here, FAFSA completion data was really just starting to become available. And we started, I was working in a different capacity at the time. And as I worked with our College Access Network partners, particularly our ICANN, which is our affiliate of NCAN, but also our agency at the time, we are now part of the Iowa Department of Education, but we were an independent state agency that administered state scholarship and grant programs. So we had an interconnection there with, with those two groups. And there was a lot of emphasis on promoting the FAFSA, and I think we might have been one of the very first, if not maybe even the only, and maybe even potentially still the only one. When we look at student level FAFSA completion reports, I know we were looking at the same model that most were using, where they kind of create a portal where schools can log in. And what we started analyzing at the time was there was a pretty tight relationship between those who were logging into the portal, the number of people from a school district who were logging into that portal, and the frequency. So we were seeing huge FAFSA completion rates among people who were accessing the data, but we had really low, we were looking at rates and rates and rates, but we started looking at who's actually accessing the dashboard, who's logging in and looking at their student weekly reports. And it was the same users from the same schools. 80–90% of our schools were never logging in. So we were providing it to them. We were basically putting on a plate saying, here it is, come get it. And no one was coming to get it. So we negotiated some agreements with the U.S. Department of Ed and our state attorney general's office to be able to push out weekly FAFSA completion reports by student to each high school each week in the form of a direct, so I would say more of an active versus a passive. So instead of saying, here it is, come get it, we're saying, we're putting it on your doorstep. Instead of, we were basically trying to remove the layer of one more thing for them to do. It was one more login, one more portal. And we continue to find that those who were engaging in access, we saw a pretty significant increase in engagement that way. But we also found that there was a continued increase in FAFSA completion. Higher rates are related to those who were accessing the data. So we kind of doubled down on how do we make that even better. And as we were looking through the process, at the same time, states were starting to adopt. I think maybe Louisiana was the first. It kind of seemed like a blur because it was so long ago. It almost seems that we started having the conversation of should we be doing universal FAFSA. And we set out on I was actually in the field at the time, so I was participating in these. There were surveys, there were regional meetings, and it was overwhelming feedback from the field that this is a bad idea. But what was more important was why they thought it was a bad idea. It was just another requirement. And the feeling was there were so many expectations that were some sort of a requirement, either in the form of a graduation requirement or something, that it would become a checkbox. And the opportunities to opt out were going to continue to be exercised by those who we were most in need of getting to a completion. So, so as we looked across that, the overwhelming feedback we got was that we don't need them to complete the FAFSA. We need them to have an understanding of what is financial aid? How do I finance my future? What does all of that encompass? And we needed them to have a very strong understanding of that at a much younger age. Throwing a FAFSA in front of somebody at the end of 11th or beginning of 12th grade, just at that point in time, the ship had sailed academically for a lot of students. They'd already made their post-secondary plan. And what we had at the time was a statewide requirement. We still have it, where school districts have to put together what's called a district career and academic plan. Many states have something very similar in code. And then essentially it begins with some career exploration activities, and then they start looking at picking their high school classes that are aligned with that. And as they go through, and that's an annual requirement, and as they go through to graduation, each individual's plan gets a little bit more individually tailored, and it goes from less exploration and awareness to more decision-making. And what we found was that a lot of students were limiting their options in 8th grade because they were like, to Daniel's point, like, college is not for me. It's not for people like me, and we can't afford it. So giving them the information 11th and 12th grade, they hadn't picked classes that put them on the track to be college, quote unquote, college ready. So that was our tack in terms of avoiding the universal and how we embedded it in that requirement. That requirement, I think a phase for us is to make it a little bit more tangible, a little bit more accountable, right? There's state assessments for reading and math, and there's not a state assessment for making sure people implement the financial literacy component strongly. I mean, that would be my next kind of a dream to get some accountability there, but making that part of required instruction and curriculum for every student in the state across a 5-year span, we felt was a better approach.
And can you talk to us? I know you can't give us like the whole rundown of the curriculum, but what does that look like to integrate it into post-secondary planning across those 5 years? What did they kind of learn when?
Just in the financial aid space, for example. I mean, so the idea is helping students understand that college is possible. And I say the word college here just because the other words are very long, but all of the things that they could possibly do after school, they're all possible for you. Don't limit your options in 8th grade because you think, or you've been told, or your family may feel that this isn't an option. Incorporating some of that into 8th grade family nights, for example, as your child is picking their classes, don't rule out these options, because there are things that we can do to help support families with financing post-secondary. So in the early phases, it's understanding the big picture, and the primary goal of it in 8th grade is don't rule out post-secondary options in middle school because of money. If they walk away with nothing other than that understanding, they've at least pursued a pathway that is more by choice. You can limit yourself later, but if you limit yourself on the front end, there are very few on-ramps to get back on as students navigate high school.
Right. When you say choice, it's assuming that you know what the menu is.
Right, exactly.
So I love starting in middle school. So many of us are turning to middle school as that critical point that we tend to ignore.
Yeah, and I was, as a school counselor at the time, I worked in some schools, particularly when I was in New York, that as high school counselors, we would go down and do kind of bringing you into high school. We would go in and do classes. We would meet with students and families individually. And we regularly heard that. I mean, I'm going back on experience that's quite old at this point, but we heard from families that, well, we're going to take these classes instead of these classes because that's probably not going to be for us anyway. And I didn't know what I didn't know then. So I didn't think to challenge and push back on that.
And we started this webinar with data. What data are you seeing from this strategy? Is this working? Is it like the secret sauce for schools with large rates of FAFSA completion? Do you see uneven outcomes? What's kind of the result that you can paint that picture for?
Yes, we haven't necessarily seen year over year significant increases, but I'm going to put that in some context here. First of all, it's a fairly new, that's only been in code for about 2 years. So we've not yet seen necessarily the response to that. But one of the things that I will say is we've had a lot of other efforts in FAFSA completion over time. And I would say the win is that we haven't seen a decline in FAFSA completion. We've maintained since 2012, we've had not even quite less than 1% of decline over that time, but we've had almost an 11% decline in enrollment among high school students from 2012 to 2024. And we've had a decrease in every single year, including before, during, and after the pandemic. So fewer and fewer students are choosing to go and enrolling, but our FAFSA completion. Someone mentioned earlier, I don't know if it was Alessandra, that I was not necessarily surprised by the decline in FAFSA completion and the increase in enrollment, because what we found was that the students who were doing it because their counselor told them to and they didn't have a plan to go to college anyway, there wasn't much effort put toward those students, or the students weren't following through because of all the challenges we felt last year, which really screwed up a lot of states nationally in their state financial aid administration because it's based off, it's like our version of admissions yield for colleges. We have long-standing predictive formulas, and they were wildly thrown off in some states. Some of our neighbor states were off by $40–50 million and trying to figure out how to cover that. So that was a huge, so in terms of like not necessarily seeing huge changes for us, but we've also kind of doubled down on other data, and we are starting to measure the implementation of FAFSA completion efforts. And when you mentioned the secret sauce, what we noticed is so almost 70% of our schools have set some sort of a FAFSA completion goal, and that's voluntary. But having a FAFSA champion, or I say FAFSA, but someone has a champion in this space is really critical, especially an administrator. I have spent much of my career preaching to this choir, ISCA, our school counselor associations, our college access networks, but those people get it. Like they don't need more motivators from people like us. And for the last 5 or so years, I'm trying to get into school administrator conferences. And what we found is that where we see the biggest change is when either there's a huge champion inside who's such a bulldog that nobody can get in their way, or an administrator or leadership team that says, this will be an important function of our high school, and it won't be secondary to anything else that we do because it's so critically important. And that's a case-by-case basis. So my roadshow has turned into being in front of superintendents and principals who direct the work of the school counselors and the college access professionals from CBOs who are in the buildings, and saying, instead of saying, no, sorry, you can't come in, we have this going on today, they're welcoming those individuals in. So I think that would probably be a big piece of, where we're seeing success. The problem is a lot of the dashboards tend to flatten out the averages, and it's hard to then tell where your success stories are without digging qualitatively into that.
Yeah, right. We always say no data without stories and no stories without data. It can only tell us so much.
Exactly.
Dan, I see you like nodding your head. Did you have anything that you wanted to scream and shout?
Oh, tons. I mean, David is doing such a great job, but I'm also reminded of a story I heard fairly recently about an institution doing a Pell signing day. Lots of places do sort of athletic signing days where everyone comes in and talks about their athletic scholarship and what a wonderful thing. But they actually do a financial aid signing day where they celebrate students who have filed and gotten a Pell Grant, or find their scholarship, their need-based scholarship. So I think there are ways to think about that piece as well. And I'll echo, I typed this in the chat, but I also think it's important to say one thing I forgot to mention. It is important you think about the FSA ID as a separate process from FAFSA. I think it is complicated, and we've further complicated it by trying to do it all at once. So thinking about this in bite-sized chunks, I recognize there's a risk that students might disengage, but thinking about this in bite-sized chunks, I think can move you along the road faster.
Yeah, I was thinking that too when David was talking, that we've got Planet Florida and incorporating those financial aid lessons into Planet Florida and doing those bite-sized age-appropriate chunks that college is possible, and look at what's waiting for you, 7th grader, 8th grader. And then the successes that you've seen as a result of that. I mean, it sounds like a win to me, honestly, looking at that decline in high school enrollment and keeping FAFSA steady and college enrollment steady is really impressive.
Yeah, I know that we're kind of
yeah.
short on time. I just wanted to kind of end with, I think what's next for us is we all have some version of a FAFSA dashboard, right? And I think expanding that to include what Daniel's mentioned, we had been working with folks at U.S. Department of Ed on incorporating FSA ID as part of our completion reports that we would be able to send to schools. That hasn't made a whole lot of progress in the last couple of months, unfortunately. But also we are doubling down on refilers and looking at providing FAFSA completion dashboards for second-year students and providing those to institutions, because even though they may have them, a lot of our access organizations are super focused on high school students, but we see a huge stop out particularly from low-income students, and a relationship between that and not refiling their FAFSA the second year. So that's a big piece for us. And then I think the next thing, and I'm hearing Alessandra say that and knowing Bill from your network pretty well, exploring some partnerships with our college NCAN. We have MEC, which is our version of SREB. I don't know how connected you might be to them, but having some way to have these dashboard networks that are people who can share common, consistent data and be the champions for that, reviewing the methodology. One thing that I would encourage you to dig into with such a low rate compared to your enrollment rate, is there state data that might look different? Our state data, we have actual FAFSA records, so we know what our data is. It's not super tightly aligned with what's on the NCAN dashboard, and it's simply a different methodology. It's not like one's right or one's wrong. It's just you can only visualize what you have. And then also doubling down on the direct reporting versus the passive reporting. I think those would be things that networks could help provide to those of you on the webinar who are out in the field doing the work. Because, you know, you look at a percentage and say we're low. I don't know how it is in Florida, but one thing, distinctly different thing I noticed when I was in the Northeast was that we had younger high school seniors. So data that is built on age rather than dedicated grade level. Our denominator doesn't line up at all on FSA ID and on the USFSA because it's by date of birth and not on grade. So those are some things that I would encourage to make sure that you know exactly what you have.
Right. What problem you're trying to solve for. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've heard so many great strategies today, and thank you for sharing those approaches from Iowa and your journey, how you got there. Let's make sure we're recognizing those champions making this work happen on the ground in Florida. I just wanted to repost the nominations for our Trailblazer category for FAFSA especially. And then speaking of recognition, I hope all of you will join us for our Talent Strong Florida Summit, May 5th through 7th. We've got early bird registration happening through March 31st. After that, the rate will go up, and I've been instructed to tell everyone, especially because these have long shelf lives post-recording, that we probably will sell out on our hotels. So make sure you book your registration and hotel. The early bird truly will get the worm this year. Thank you all so much for joining us. We are out of time, but please know that you will get a full recap, all the wonderful links shared, the 30+ strategies that were communicated both via slide and out loud and through fireside chat. And look forward to following up and seeing many of you at our summit in May. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.